Hello everyone, I'm Solbin Choi, and I'll be guiding you through Business Management Paper 1 exam techniques. This course was designed by Gordon Hung and I, and this should be able to get you to master your case study and know exactly what kind of answers to write in your exams. So paper 1 consists of 3 sections. A, B, and C. Ideally, you should be spending most time on answering section C because it's a very long answer. It's a 20-mark worth question, and you're expected to write a page to 2 answer of that single question. So section A consists of 20 marks in total, and you get to choose 2 out of 3 questions. And none of these questions are going to require you to do mathematical calculations, and the maximum marks each question will give you would be 6. So there won't be any in-depth questions you would have to answer, mostly explanations and definitions, and a little bit of discussion and suggestion, but then you won't be required to give a judgment or recommendation in section A. Okay? So your mark allocation is either going to be a 4 and 6, or like a 6 and 2 and 2, 2 plus 2. And that's going to be 1 set. You're going to be doing 2 of those. Okay. And then for section B, you can get any combination of questions that are marked ranged between 2 to 6, and even up to 8 in some kinds. And the maximum mark you can have for each question is 10 marks. So you might have questions A, B, C, D, and A being worth 4 marks, B being worth 4 marks, and C being worth 10 marks. Overall being 20 marks in total. Okay. And for section B, you won't have a choice. Also, because there's a 10 mark, you would have to discuss. This means give advantages and disadvantages, and come up with a solution that suits the case study situation. And then section C is going to be an extension of the 10-mark question. You're going to have to make a decision, and they're going to give you 2 options. Option A being something, option B being something, and what you have to do is analyze the advantages and disadvantages of each options and apply that to the case study to conclude which option is a better solution with your opinions in it. Okay. These are going to be based off a primary resource that's released on the exam date. So it's important that you understand the case study situation to see how these sources or options are going to impact your case study. So these will be gone through more in detail throughout the rest of our sessions, throughout the 5 weeks this session. And oh yeah, sorry. These sessions are designed for you to do better, score better in exams. It's not going to teach you business management content. It's going to focus on the case study and command words and what you're supposed to be writing for different types of questions. Not so much on what's human resource, what are some leadership styles. Those should all be covered in school already, and you should be revising them on your own now. Okay, so that's my expectation as I'm going through the slides. You already know the content. Okay. So, to make the most out of these sessions, you'll have homework every session. Okay, and these homework, keep them in a single document. So by the end of all 5 sessions, you should have a study pack, case study revision pack of your own, just based off the homeworks I've given you. And keep a separate document about exam strategies, because I'm going to go through command words and specifically how to answer them. If you mess that up with your case study revision pack, it's going to be very difficult to find information when you need them. So make sure you have separate documents for that. And know your content. Before you walk in and listen to any of these sessions, it's important that you know the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing before I tell you this. You already know the leadership styles, that there's laissez-faire and autocratic, paternalistic, and all of that. I shouldn't be teaching you this at this point. Okay, so we'll get started with our first set of questions. First, I'm going to go through the 2 to 4 mark questions and how to answer them. Okay. In the marking criteria, it's written as demonstrate knowledge and understanding. So it's testing your ability on being able to show that you know stuff, show that you've learnt the content. And knowing, memorizing is key for 2 to 4 mark questions. So these are some command terms that are usually used in 2 to 4 mark questions. Okay, you should have seen this very often. Define outsourcing. This is when you give a definition. Outsourcing is the process of blah, 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 and then give further examples and explanations. So define questions are usually worth 2 marks. Okay, first mark being the definition itself. Second mark usually being explanations and further examples that shows that you've completely understood the definition of whatever word you're trying to define. More examples will be gone through in the next slides. Describe is different to define. Okay, it's going to ask you to describe outsourcing or how outsourcing would look like in the case study. Applications are usually expected, but if the question doesn't refer to the case study, you don't have to apply to it. Okay. Outline means bullet points. When it says outline, don't bother writing in paragraphs, thinking of all the connectives like however, but, furthermore, moreover. Just list the steps in bullet points or just 1, 2, 3, 4, and that should be enough. If the outline mark was 4, you should have 4 steps. If you have 2 marks for outline, you should have 2 steps. State is simply state. So no applications or further explanations are needed. Okay. State an example of a leadership style. Then you're just gonna write paternalistic. You don't have to explain what paternalistic means or anything like that. It's usually going to be 1 mark, and if it's 2 marks, it's going to say state 2 of something. Oops. Now, so these are some formulas that could be easily written down for your future reference. When it says define, give a definition with elaboration examples, describe, state something, state, and then apply that to the case study. If it says state, just state it. Okay. So if it's a describe question and it's 4 marks, you're going to do 2 sets of these. You're going to state 2 things and apply twice. If it's 6 marks, you're going to do 3 sets of these. State 3 times and apply 3 times. Exam style questions now. I might be going a little too quick. Oh, it's okay. You guys have the PowerPoints. So, if you've read through the case study already, it should have talked about how P&S trawlers are trying to be environmentally sustainable and ethical by not overfishing, and the government's setting restrictions on the fishing quota so that they have enough environmental resources for the future generations. Always remember, defining questions only ask for a definition. It doesn't require any kind of application. Okay. So define the term environmental sustainability and it's worth 2 marks. As soon as you see that, you'd be like, okay, it's using the keyword define. I need my definition and my example of what environmental sustainability looks like. Okay. So my answer could be this: environmental sustainability is the business activity that meets the needs of current generations without harming the environmental needs of future generations. Some examples of this could include not overfishing, recycling, filtering liquid and gas wastes. So the first mark is given for the definition, second mark for example and elaboration. In this answer, business activity that meets the current needs of generations. The first bit in blue is the definition mark. Some examples may include is a signposting that tells you that you're going to write about your second mark. Okay. So, yeah, it doesn't require an application to the case study. Usually easy sentencing structures would be using sentence starters, like some examples of this is, or for example, for instance. All those would be a sentence starter to get your second marks. So if you find it difficult to just understand that you have to write a definition and an example, just say you have to state the answer, full stop, and start with for example. Now we'll look at a different type of question. Describe 2 advantages of P&S trawlers having a low labor turnover. So first we have our keyword, describe. And then it's 4 marks and we have to give 2 advantages. Do your maths. If you need to do 2 advantages and it's 4 marks, instantly you'd be like, okay, each advantage is gonna worth 2 marks. If it's worth 2 marks, I shouldn't stop at just stating an advantage, should I? Okay. It specifically said P&S trawlers having a low labor turnover. So, a clothes shop, what's an advantage for a clothes shop having low labor turnover? Well, the staffs can build friendship with customers if they're not changed as often. But for a fishing industry, that's not the case. The fact that they have low labor turnover doesn't mean that they're going to build relationship with customers, because laborers, workers within the fishing industry don't interact with customers. Okay, so this is what I mean by apply it to the case study. What is it about the low labor turnover that's specifically beneficial to our fishing industry P&S trawlers? Thinking about that, have a second to think about that. What kind of advantages would low labor turnover have? It has tons. Your textbook's gonna give you tons, but which of them apply to our fishing industry, our case study? So an example answer would look like that. First advantage or second advantage. First, less time is being spent on training new staff. Okay, this is going to be, less time is spent on training new staff is going to be something that's already in your textbook or your study guide. And then the second sentence should be about how this advantage looks like in the context of P&S trawlers. So this means more time can be spent on fishing, improving efficiency for P&S trawlers. So if less time is spent on training new staff, this means more time can be spent on fishing. And if more time is being spent on fishing, efficiency increases, right? For a set amount of time, more fish is being caught because less training is being done. Okay. The fact that less time is being spent on training new staff would apply differently to different case studies. So always be thinking in terms of this case study and the characteristics, the circumstances and situations of people within P&S trawlers. So our second advantage is less recruitment costs. When you fire people, you have to give them the retiring funding and stuff. And when you're hiring new people, you have to send out advertisements that you're recruiting new people and things. Okay, so all these are extra costs involved in recruitment. That's going to be your statement. And then after this comes your explanation or examples to why this is a benefit to P&S trawlers. This means more capital can be spent on fishing equipment to improve productivity. Okay, so if less costs are being spent in recruitment, it means those costs could be spent on something else. In P&S trawlers, specifically, it's going to be spent on fishing materials, fishing equipment. Like they mentioned, they have nets, they have these radars and everything to monitor fishing. So you can say, overall, by doing this, it improves the productivity as they can catch more fish or use better fishing material and make it easier for them to locate fish. So do you see where you get your stating mark and your application mark? Usually your application mark sentences are going to start with "this means." Not always, but it's a safe option. Just like for definition, your second mark started with "for example." Describing questions, your second mark sentences would start with "this means." State two features of a partnership. Stating, okay? So, it's 2 marks overall, and you have to state 2 features. Okay, so 1 feature is worth 1 mark. So I simply have to write something about a feature of a partnership to get my mark. Should be your mental calculations. So there we go. First, it's a commercial business owned by 2 or more people. Second, it's an unincorporated business that at least one of the partners would have unlimited liability. These sound a lot like something in your textbooks. It should sound something a lot like in your textbooks. And that's what's required of you when it says state. So no need to think of second sentences when you see the word state. Okay, and the blue and the green are where you get your marks. Okay, we'll look at the case study now. So, I'm sure you've already been through the case study, but first time reading it, you should have a highlighter up and be highlighting key terms. Key terms means terms that are likely to be asked in definition questions. Okay, things like generations, they're not going to ask for definitions of generations. But if you keep reading, they have partnership. They've always been a family partnership. Okay, they have convert to a private limited company, things like that. All those are going to be all those should be highlighted as you go through and read them, because in section A, they are always going to ask you to write a definition or at least describe the characteristics of the key terms mentioned here. They will never, okay, I'll say this again, they will never ask for definitions or descriptions of key terms that have not been explicitly mentioned in the case study. Okay. So, because there's a private limited company, you can be like, okay, if I have to study for a definition of a private limited company, maybe I should do so for a public limited company as well, and a sole trader, and an NGO. But then in your paper 1, they're not going to ask you for those definitions. If NGO is not mentioned anywhere in the case study, they're not going to ask for the definition. So, go through the case study with a highlighter, highlighting all the key terms you can notice. And this should be easy because you already know all your content. Okay, so we'll go through it quickly now. It's okay, like we said, we have a family industry. So family business, that's one. partnership, private limited company, uncertainties. Another reason was the great governmental regulation in the industry increased by families' potential personal liability. Personal liability. If anything went wrong, following the conversation, Pekka and his sister Tapio each owned 48% of the company's shares, so we've got shares. And then Finland has a beautiful coastline. Largest industry, tourism, sightseeing, all that. Technology is growing rapidly. Okay. Government is concerned about environmental sustainability. That's our next one. Fishing quotas. Quotas are types of regulations governments put on industries and businesses. Responsible, including marketing, finance, administrations, responsibly aim of preserving stock for future generations. So, marketing. Uncertain future, global trend overfishing. Trade agreements. Market prices. And so on. Okay, so do you see how it's done? Just simply highlight all the words that you know you should have known. Outsourcing, wow. And then after you do that, at the end of this case study, you should have an appendix. These are some key terms as well. Okay, so you should know the definition of current liabilities, what they are. Current assets, fixed assets, salaries, non-profit, net profit margin, and sales. Okay, it's a common mistake. Students usually just read the case study hard and neglect the numbers, being like, oh, they're just numbers. They're not just numbers. They are important stuff, and each of them have different meanings. As in, if your current assets are on a zero, they had zero cash, they're on zero cash. This is a very severe or difficult situation, a bad situation P&S Troller is in. So make sure you don't just read the numbers but understand them when you go through the case study. So having been through the case study, these were some key terms that were mentioned. Okay, partnership likely mentioned. So what you have to do for each of these key terms is find the definitions, memorize them. If not, characteristics. So what are some characteristics of job rotation? How is it done? Advantages, disadvantages, and applications. How these look like in P&S Trollers. So definitions, you're doing that for define questions. Characteristics, that's for describe questions. That links with how these look like in P&S Trollers, because describing questions usually require application. Advantages and disadvantages for describing and stating questions. It's going to ask you to state an advantage, state a disadvantage, or describe two advantages. And if it says describe, you know that you're not going to stop at stating. You're going to be like, this means to P&S Trollers it's going to be detrimental because, and all that. So, for example, if we look at induction training. First, we think of a 2-mark definition answer and be like, oh, the definition of an induction training is training the employees within the business through a PowerPoint presentation, things like that. That's the definition. Know the characteristics of it. Okay, it has low costs. It's done in batches. It's not individual. It usually requires a senior member to be teaching. These are some characteristics. And how it will look like in P&S Trollers. So this means a senior member wouldn't be fishing and instead teaching. A group of learners or new employees would be going around within the fishing industry, within the business, looking at stuff, you normally distracting other employees. and also look at advantages and disadvantages. So induction training would allow employees to get an overall big picture of how work is done here, but it's not going to give them the specific details on how each individual fishing work is done. That might be the downside. Or it might not communicate the culture and system because it's being taught in a group. Each individual might have very specific or personal questions that might not be able to be answered because they're being taught in a group. These are some basic advantages and disadvantages of induction training. And then your next step would be, okay, how does this advantage look like in P&S trawlers? So if they can teach in a batch, this means they can save a lot of time. So once the training is done, employees can go straight into fishing, hence improving efficiency. Or the downside could be, they might have individual questions that are not answered and potentially make mistakes on the trawler, on the boat, which could be very, very dangerous because teamwork is essential to the fishing work. So those kind of applications. So these 4 things are things you should be summarizing or analyzing for these key terms. I found 16 of them, and there should be more. And these are definitions you would have to know. There are many definitions in the business textbook, a lot of them. It's best if you know all of them, but then these are stuff that are more likely to be on your paper 1 exam. For the sake of you doing that, because you might not do that if I just tell you to do it, I'm gonna send out homeworks. And yeah. So first, summarize the P&S trawler situation in 30 to 40 bullet points. This is because it's easy to skim read the whole text and quickly read past paragraphs if you don't quite understand it, and aim or hope that the second paragraph would make more sense and that you understand the paragraph you've just read. That's a common mistake that leads to misunderstanding, and if you haven't understood one part of the text, it's going to be much more difficult to understand the rest of the text properly. So summarize the P&S trawler situation in 30 to 40 bullet points, ideally having at least 1 to 2 sentence summaries for each paragraph. And each paragraph are filled with content. So you should really have like 2-3 sentences summarizing each paragraph. And overall, that should add up to around 30 and 40. And like we said, write down all the definitions of these key terms, their advantages of all the key terms, and how they relate to PST, the disadvantage of all the key terms, and how they relate to PST. And then this should be your first section of your revision pack. So your homework booklet should start off with a nice summary, bullet point summary, and then all the key terms, definitions of them, all the advantages and disadvantages of them, and their applications. Like I said, by the end of this 5 session, you should have a full revision pack of your own. Yeah. Okay, and next we have maths coming. So this is AO4. A lot of this are going to be just calculation questions, graph questions, or table questions. What they require you to do is know what the numbers mean. That's one thing. Know how to calculate numbers. This is easy because you have a calculator. And you're also going to have a formula booklet. So just know how to use the right formulas. Okay? And then be able to draw or construct tables and graphs, diagrams, like asset test. Like profit and loss accounts, yes, and cash flow, things like that. It's not going to be a massive question like a 10-mark maths question. If it's a 10 marks, it's going to ask you to discuss and analyze the results you got. Okay, just calculating the numbers itself are going to worth very small marks. So if you're confident, if you're like a maths person being like, okay, I've covered all the maths, I know exactly how to calculate things, I've mastered it. Sad news for you. That's not gonna get you enough marks, okay? You need to know the number, like know the meaning of the number you got. Okay, I got 0 for cash. I got my answer right, yay, that's not where it stops. 0 cash means the business is very unstable, and when they have sudden outcome needed, they're not gonna be able to pay that quickly enough. Those kind of understandings should come after the calculations, straight after the calculations. So these are some command terms and marks, where you get your marks. If the question says annotate, label, or complete, it means fill in. It's gonna give you a graph or some kind of a table or diagram, and you just have to write in the blanks. Okay? Labeling usually requiring arrows, but these are the fairly easier questions that are worth 1 to 2 marks each. And then we have calculate, determine, identify questions. These are when you have to get out your formula and calculator. So you're going to be doing your maths, being like, okay, something times something gets this, and then the market price is this, and gross profit, everything. Okay, these are the key terms that's requiring to do the maths. And then the plot, draw, construct, or prepare are the larger mark questions. It's going to be blank, and you're going to be starting from scratch. So if it asks you to plot a decision tree, it's not going to give you a decision tree where it says complete the decision tree. It's going to give you a decision tree, and you have to fill in the rest. Plot, you're starting from scratch. So it's important. This is an exam thing. Make sure you do this in pencil, because they allow graphs to be done in pencil. Draw, the same as well. Construct, prepare. They have different words, but overall they all mean the same thing. It means make, draw. The question's not going to give you anything. You write the whole answer yourself. This is, we're going to give you the numbers, you do the maths. And this is, just label it. Tell me where it is. Yeah. And to get all your marks, always include your units. Apparently this is a big mistake you students make. And because the formula booklet is already there, the fact that you know the formula doesn't give you a mark. The fact that you know how to use the right numbers in the formula doesn't give you marks. Where you do get marks is that you know which formula to use, and you know what kind of units it is. Is it in millions, or is it in billions, or is it in grams? Things like that. So whether you know which formula to use and the unit are the 2 main marks, and then just in case you get the answer wrong, step-by-step working out, yeah. But if you get your final answer wrong, they're not going to be nice. They're taking marks off for making the final answer wrong, because apparently final answer is where you get the most marks for calculation questions. It's not like maths, okay? Right. So these are some example questions. If it says construct the cash flow forecast and it gave you all these numbers, you're going to use these numbers to make the cash flow forecast, the table. You should somewhat know what the table should look like. We have all the cash inflow, all the cash outflow, net profit, and the closing balance, and the opening balance, all that. It's not going to give it to you in order. Usually it gives it to you in alphabetical order. Okay, so of these, you have to derive which are cash outflow, which of them are inflow, and use them respectively. They're not going to give you all the information, because they didn't give you an opening balance or a closing balance. They gave you an opening balance for May, but not for June. That's because you should calculate the next opening balance based on the numbers you have. Okay. So if it says construct, this is what you're doing. This is what you're drawing. This is all made by you. Yeah. And the green numbers are the numbers you should have calculated on your own. Okay. Here there isn't a unit. That's gonna get at least 2 marks off. One to 2 marks off. Because units are, like I said, one of the main parts, main mistakes students often make. Even students very confident at maths. And it's really sad. It's really sad if you know how to do everything, but just miss out the smallest thing, and get your marks off. Okay. Unlike construct, complete is gonna give you a table. So it's gonna give you missing numbers. And you'll be like, okay, in February, the sales revenue was 3,000, bank overdraft being 0. How do I find the cash inflow? You add them up, right? So 3,000, write 3,000 in there. These are the cash outflow. Okay, they have that and that and that and that. What's the total cash outflow? It's your job to be calculating them, but then complete is, as you see, easier than construct. They already gave you the table. You don't have to think about the order structure if it asks you to complete something. So, the green numbers are filled in for you. These are the numbers you should have calculated on your calculator. Okay, that's it for today. So have a look at recap of the homework. Go through all the key points, key terms, definitions, advantages, disadvantages, applications, and label the final appendix, what each of them mean. Is this good? Is this bad? Tell me something about it. Show me that you understood the financial situation of PSC. Great job. Bye-bye.